The C-130's ramp lowered with a hydraulic groan, vomiting a blast of superheated air and fine, ochre dust into the cargo bay. Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma blinked once, her eyes adjusting to the brutal glare of the Afghan sun. The air tasted of baked earth and diesel fumes. Around her, the Marine Force recon platoon stirred, their movements economical and weary. They were returning from a 2-week patrol. She was the new variable, the unwelcome addition dropped into their world of sweat-caked gear and hard-won familiarity. She hefted her pack, its weight a familiar comfort, and walked down the ramp. Her boots crunched on the gravel of the airstrip at Forward Operating Base Kestrel. The base was an ugly, sprawling thing, a scab of HESCO barriers and sun-bleached tents on a vast, indifferent landscape. Mountains, sharp and barren, clawed at the horizon. The platoon's senior NCO, a gunnery sergeant with a chest like a barrel and a face carved from granite, watched her approach. His name was Cole Riker. His call sign, she'd read in the file, was Gunny, a term of respect he seemed to wear like armor. His eyes, pale blue and hostile, raked over her. They took in her clean, unfaded Marpat uniform, her rank insignia, the crisp lines of her gear. He saw an officer, Navy, a woman. He saw everything but the truth. Lieutenant Commander Sharma? His voice was a low rumble, laced with a gravelly skepticism that bordered on insubordination. He didn't wait for an answer. Lieutenant Hayes is in the briefing tent. He's expecting you. He turned his back on her, a clear dismissal, and started barking orders at his men. Diaz, get that saw cleaned before you even think about chow. Evans, inventory the demo. Now. A young corporal, Diaz, caught her eye and offered a smirk before turning away to haul a machine gun. Another, older sergeant, Evans, gave her a flat, unreadable look before moving to the ordnance containers. The message was clear. She was an outsider, a liability. Anya adjusted the strap of her rifle and walked toward the briefing tent, her stride measured and calm. She ignored the stares and the silence that followed her. She had been in rooms like this before, faced men like Riker before. Their contempt was a predictable friction, a constant in the equation of her life. It meant nothing. The mission was all that mattered. Inside the tent, the air was thick and stagnant. Maps covered a folding table, weighted down with empty magazines and canteens. Second Lieutenant Hayes, a young man with earnest eyes and the fresh-faced anxiety of new command, stood and offered a hand. Ma'am, welcome to Kestrel. I'm Lieutenant Hayes. Sharma, she said, her handshake firm and brief. Gunny Riker giving you the tour? Hayes asked, attempting a friendly tone. He pointed me in the right direction, Anya replied, her voice neutral. Riker entered the tent, ducking under the flap and bringing his palpable hostility with him. He loomed over the table, dwarfing the young lieutenant. Sir, the men are squared away. Ready for the brief, his gaze flicked to Anya. Is the commander joining us? The title was a barb, meant to highlight her perceived distance from the grit of their work. Commander Sharma is our liaison for this op, Hayes said, a little too quickly. She'll be accompanying us. Riker picked up a canteen, unscrewed the cap, and took a long drink, his eyes never leaving Anya. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Accompanying us? He repeated slowly, tasting the words. Right. Another body to watch. Another mouth to feed. He set the canteen down with a hard thud. With all due respect, Lieutenant, he said, his eyes still locked on Anya. This is a force recon op. We move fast, we move quiet. We don't have time for tourists. Anya met his gaze without flinching. The air in the small tent crackled with tension. She could feel the weight of his experience, the loyalty of his men, the entire institutional inertia of the Marine Corps pressing down on her. She felt none of it. Her internal landscape was a flat, calm sea. She was a rock, and his animosity was just water, loud but ultimately harmless. I'll keep up, Gunnery Sergeant, she said, her voice quiet but carrying an unnerving weight. Hayes, sensing the escalating conflict, quickly stepped in. All right, let's get to it. Intel has a high-value target, an insurgent bomb-maker named Al-Kafrani. He's holed up in a compound in the Zarin Valley. Command wants eyes on. We're to infiltrate, plant microsensors on the perimeter, and exfil before dawn. No contact. Strictly recon. He pointed to a satellite image on the map. It showed a cluster of mud brick buildings surrounded by a high wall, nestled in a narrow, rocky valley. It was a natural fortress. Riker leaned over the map, his hostility momentarily replaced by professional focus. Ingress looks like shit. The valley floor is a kill box. We'll have to approach from the north ridge, use the high ground. Agreed, Hayes said. We'll move in 2 teams. Gunny, you'll take Alpha. Evans, you have Bravo. I'll be with you. He looked at Anya, hesitating. Ma'am, you'll be with the Overwatch element, with me and Bravo team. It was the safest, least critical position. Place for an observer. Riker grunted, a sound of grudging approval. Keep her out of the way. Anya said nothing. She studied the map, her eyes tracing the contour lines, memorizing the angles of approach, the potential fields of fire, the dead ground. She saw 3 machine gun emplacements that weren't marked on the intel brief. She saw a potential exfiltration route the planners had missed. She saw the flaws in their plan, but she remained silent. It was not her place to speak. Not yet. Her role was to observe, to liaise, and to survive the arrogance of men who believed the world was exactly as they saw it. The dismissal was as thick and suffocating as the dust hanging in the air. For the next 12 hours, Anya Sharma was a ghost. When she checked her communications gear, Riker sent Corporal Diaz to double-check her work. When she field-stripped and cleaned her rifle, a weapon she could disassemble and reassemble blindfolded in under a minute, Riker watched from a distance, his arms crossed, a sneer playing on his lips as if waiting for her to make a mistake. The men of the platoon followed his lead. They gave her a wide berth, their conversations dropping to a murmur when she passed. They treated her not as a fellow warrior, but as a contamination. The most pointed insult came during the final gear inspection. The platoon laid out their equipment on ponchos, a meticulous arrangement of metal, nylon, and plastic. Riker walked the line like a predator, his eyes missing nothing. He adjusted a strap on one Marine's pack, quizzed another on his ammunition count, and tapped a third's helmet as if checking for soundness. When he reached Anya, he stopped. He didn't inspect her gear. He inspected her. His gaze was a physical weight, moving from her boots to her face, lingering for a moment on the faint, silvery scar that traced the line of her jaw, a souvenir from a place he couldn't imagine. "You ever been outside the wire, Commander?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she and a few nearby Marines could hear. Anya finished securing a pouch on her plate carrier. "I have." "Right?" he scoffed. "On some Codel tour, sipping tea with a warlord? This ain't that. Out here, things get loud. People get hurt. You fall behind, you compromise the team." "You compromise my team." He took a step closer, invading her personal space. He was taller, broader, a wall of muscle and contempt. The smell of sweat and chewing tobacco rolled off him. "I want to be crystal clear, ma'am," he hissed, the honorific dripping with venom. "You get one of my boys killed because you can't keep up, because you freeze, because you're not what you're supposed to be. I will personally drag you back to this FOB. That's not a threat. It's a field guarantee." The nearby Marines, Diaz among them, tensed. This was beyond the usual inter-service rivalry. This was a direct, personal challenge. A threat. Anya didn't move. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even blink. She simply looked at him, her dark eyes as calm and deep as a winter lake. In them, Riker saw none of the fear or indignation he expected. He saw nothing. A perfect, unnerving stillness. It was like staring into the lens of a camera, something that recorded everything and felt nothing. The absolute lack of reaction was more unnerving than any retort. She held his gaze for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable for everyone but her. Then, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Understood, Gunnery Sergeant," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the simple acknowledgement of a received transmission. Riker stared for another second, searching for a crack in her composure and finding none. Frustrated, he turned away with a grunt. 5 minutes, he barked to the platoon. Get your minds right. As the Marines moved to make their final preparations, Sergeant Evans, the older, quiet one, walked past Anya. He didn't speak, but his eyes lingered on her for a moment. There was no mockery in his gaze, but a flicker of something else. A cautious curiosity, perhaps. He had seen the exchange, had seen her absolute refusal to be baited, and it had registered. He didn't know what she was, but he was beginning to suspect she wasn't what Riker thought she was. Anya finished her own preparations, her movements fluid and efficient. She chambered around, checked the safety, and slung her rifle. She scanned the darkening sky, the first stars beginning to prick the deep indigo canvas. The air was cooling, the wind whispering through the concertina wire. She could feel the familiar premission hum in her veins, a low-frequency vibration of heightened senses and absolute focus. Riker's threat was already forgotten, a piece of irrelevant data discarded to make room for what was important. The valley was waiting. The mission was all that mattered. The opinions of the men around her were just noise, and noise was the first thing you learned to filter out. She was ready. The night was moonless, a shroud of absolute blackness that swallowed the landscape. Under the fuzzy green glow of night vision, the world became a surreal, two-dimensional diorama. The platoon moved like wraiths, their boots making barely a whisper on the rocky ground. They were 2 hours into the infiltration, climbing the steep, treacherous northern ridge that overlooked the Zarin Valley. The only sounds were the rasp of their own breathing and the skittering of loose shale under their feet. Anya moved with an unnerving grace. While the younger Marines sometimes stumbled, their packs shifting their center of gravity, she seemed to flow over the terrain. She maintained perfect intervals, her head on a constant, slow swivel, scanning the sectors the others ignored. Riker, moving at the head of the column with Alpha Team, occasionally glanced back, his jaw tight. He was waiting for her to falter, to ask for a break, to show any sign of weakness. She gave him nothing. She was a machine, a steady, silent presence at the rear of Bravo Team. They reached the designated overwatch position, a jagged outcropping of rock 1,000 meters from the target compound. Below, the valley was a pool of darkness. The compound was a faint, geometric shape, distinguished only by a single, dim light burning in a window. "All right, set security," Lieutenant Hayes whispered into his comms. "Bravo Team, we're on overwatch. Alpha, begin your descent to the objective. Comms check every 15-inch. Solid copy," Riker's voice crackled back. Anya watched as Riker and his four-man team detached from the main body and began their slow, careful descent down the scree-covered slope. She settled behind a low rock wall, her rifle resting on her pack, the scope trained on the compound below. She wasn't just watching the objective. She was watching everything else. The opposite ridge, the mouth of the valley, the dark spaces between the rocks. Her senses were fully extended, a net cast into the darkness. 15 minutes passed, then 30. The silence was heavy, profound. "Alpha, this is Bravo. Sit rep. Over," Hayes whispered. "Static." Hayes tried again. "Alpha, Bravo. Comms check. Over." More static. A knot of tension formed in the small of Anya's back. "Could be the terrain," Evans murmured from his position nearby. "The valley walls can block line of sight." "Gunny knows to relocate for a signal," Hayes said, his voice tight with worry. He was about to try a third time when the night exploded. It wasn't a single gunshot. It was a roar. A coordinated, overwhelming eruption of violence. Green tracers stitched the darkness, converging on Alpha Team's last known position down the slope. The heavy, thudding report of a DSHK heavy machine gun echoed off the valley walls, tearing chunks of rock and earth from the hillside. The sound was followed by the sharp, distinctive thump whoosh of a mortar launch. "Ambush!" Diaz yelled, his voice cracking. "They're in a goddamn kill box." An instant later, the mortar round landed among the rocks where they were positioned, a deafening crump that showered them with dirt and stone fragments. The world dissolved into chaos. More rounds impacted, walking their way up the ridge. The enemy wasn't just attacking Alpha Team. They knew exactly where the Overwatch position was. The intel hadn't just been bad. It had been a trap. "Return fire! Return fire!" Hayes screamed, but his order was lost in the cacophony. His Marines were pinned, heads down, as a hailstorm of lead whizzed over their position. Diaz was firing his saw wildly, the tracers arcing uselessly into the darkness. Another Marine was screaming, a high, thin sound of agony. Anya saw Lieutenant Hayes rise up on one knee to get a better view, trying to locate the source of the DSHK. It was a brave, foolish mistake. A single round caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him around and slamming him back against the rocks. He collapsed with a groan, his rifle clattering to the ground. Panic began to set in. Their command was down. Alpha Team was either dead or dying. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and being systematically bracketed by mortars. Sergeant Evans was trying to rally the remaining men, yelling directions, but his voice was drowned out by the storm. He was a good NCO, but he was reacting, trying to plug holes in a dam that was already collapsing. Anya slid over to Hayes, her movements low and serpentine. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and hot metal. Rounds snapped inches above her head, but she moved as if taking a stroll through a park. Her focus had narrowed to a single, sharp point. The chaos was just data. The noise, information. The fear radiating from the men around her was a variable to be managed. She reached Hayes, who was clutching his shoulder, blood pulsing between his fingers. "My arm! I can't feel my arm!" he gasped, his face pale in the green glow of the night vision. Anya didn't say a word. She ripped open her IFAK, pulled out a tourniquet, and cinched it high and tight on his bicep, ignoring his cry of pain. She packed the wound with combat gauze, her hands steady, her movements practiced and sure. She had done this 100 times before in simulations and in reality. The screaming of the wounded, the proximity of death, it was all just part of the workplace environment. With the lieutenant stabilized, she scanned the valley again. Her mind was a tactical computer, processing the incoming fire, triangulating positions. The DSHK was on the roof of the main compound building. 3 other machine gun positions were staggered along the valley floor, creating a perfect interlocking field of fire. The mortar was further back, hidden in a wadi, and there were riflemen moving along the opposite ridge, preparing to flank them. They had been allowed to walk into the grinder, and now the enemy was closing the door. "They're flanking us," Evans shouted, confirming her analysis. "We're boxed in." Riker's voice, raw and desperate, finally cut through the static on the command channel, which had suddenly cleared. "Bravo, this is Alpha. We're compromised. Yeah, I'm hit. We are overrun. Break contact. I say again, break contact." Then, a burst of static and silence. Break contact. It was a death sentence. There was nowhere to run. To move was to be cut down. Riker, the unbreakable gunny, was broken. His men were gone. The platoon was shattered. The mission was a catastrophic failure. For the young Marines of Bravo Team, survival seemed impossible. For Anya Sharma, the work was just beginning. While the world dissolved into noise and terror for the Marines of Bravo Team, for Anya, it sharpened into crystalline clarity. The cacophony of battle was a symphony she understood intimately. Every staccato burst of automatic fire, every deep-throated cough of a mortar, every whining ricochet was a note telling a story, and Anya was a master at reading it. Her voice cut through the panic, not with a shout, but with a tone of absolute, unshakable authority. It was calm, precise, and held the chilling weight of command that Lieutenant Hayes, for all his training, had never possessed. Diaz, the young corporal, who was still firing his saw in long, uncontrolled bursts, flinched as if struck. 5-round bursts, Anya commanded, her voice an anchor in the storm. That rock formation, 200 meters, 10 o'clock. Suppress. Diaz, acting on pure instinct, obeyed. The wild arcs of his tracers tightened into a disciplined stream, hammering the rocks where enemy riflemen were beginning to mass for the flanking maneuver. Evans, the sergeant, who was trying to apply a dressing to the other wounded Marine, looked up, his eyes wide behind his NVGs. Get on the horn. Switch to tertiary frequency, channel 7. Tell Kestrel we are TIC, troops in contact. Broken arrow. Danger close. Give them these coordinates. She rattled off a string of numbers for an emergency fire mission, a position she had already calculated for the enemy mortar. Evans stared for a half-second, then nodded, his own panic receding in the face of her certainty. He fumbled with his radio, his hands suddenly finding their purpose again. Anya moved, a fluid shadow hugging the ground. She retrieved the platoon's grenade launcher from the pack of the wounded Marine, checking the chamber. M433 HEDP. High explosive dual purpose. Perfect. The DSHK on the roof of the compound was the linchpin of the enemy's position. It had the highest vantage point and the most powerful weapon. It had to be silenced. She crawled to the edge of their rock outcropping, finding a small notch that gave her a sliver of a firing lane. The gunner on the DSHK was arrogant, confident in his position, firing long, sweeping bursts at the pinned Marines. Anya settled the launcher's stock against her shoulder. She didn't use the sights. At this range, in these conditions, it was about instinct, about the thousands of hours she had spent on ranges, in kill houses, in the dark places of the world, making weapons an extension of her own will. She calculated the drop, the windage, the arc. It was a part of her, an intuitive physics that lived in her bones. The world seemed to slow down. She could see the green tracer rounds from the DSHK floating lazily toward her position. She exhaled slowly, her body perfectly still. Thump. The 40mm grenade left the tube with a gentle cough. It sailed through the night, a barely visible arc against the black sky. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the roof of the compound building erupted in a flash of orange and white. The deep, hammering report of the heavy machine gun ceased abruptly. A collective gasp went through the surviving Marines. The most immediate, terrifying threat had just vanished. But Anya wasn't finished. The flanking force was still moving, using the suppression from the remaining machine guns to advance. Diaz's fire was keeping their heads down, but it wouldn't hold them for long. Diaz, shift fire right. Evans, talk to me, she ordered as she reloaded the grenade launcher. Comms are through. Fire mission is on the way. ETA 2 mics. Evans yelled back, a note of awe creeping into his voice. 2 minutes. An eternity. They didn't have 2 minutes. Anya made a decision. It was brutally simple and suicidally dangerous. Cover me, she said, her voice flat. It wasn't a request. Before Evans or Diaz could respond, she was gone. She didn't run. She flowed out of their position, using a shallow ditch as cover, moving with a speed and silence that seemed impossible for a person loaded with combat gear. The Marines watched, stunned, as she disappeared into the darkness that separated them from the enemy. She was heading downhill, toward the interlocking fields of fire, toward the heart of the ambush. She moved through the terrain as if she had been born to it. Every rock, every fold in the earth was a piece of cover she exploited. The enemy gunners, their attention focused on the overwatch position, never saw the lone figure slipping through the shadows below them. She closed the distance to the nearest machine gun nest, a 2-man crew behind a crude stone sanger. 20 meters out, she went prone, sliding her rifle forward. The enemy gunner was traversing, firing a burst toward Diaz's position. Anya's rifle coughed twice, 2 precise shots so close together they sounded like one. The gunner and his assistant crumpled without a sound. She was moving again before they hit the ground. She leapfrogged to the cover of the now silent gun nest, her head on a swivel. She could hear the shouts of the enemy fighters, confused now. One of their guns was down. The DSHK was silent. Their perfect ambush was starting to unravel. The second machine gun opened up, firing blindly in her general direction. The rounds kicked up dust around her, but she was already sighting in. This time, she didn't have a clear shot. She pulled a fragmentation grenade from her vest, pulled the pin, let the spoon fly, counted to 2, and tossed it in a high, soft arc. It landed perfectly in the shallow pit where the gun team was located. The resulting blast was a muffled crump, followed by screams that were quickly silenced. 2 machine guns down. The flankers on the ridge, now without their covering fire, hesitated. Their advance stalled. In that moment of hesitation, the sky ripped open. The artillery that Evans had called in arrived with the sound of tearing fabric, a high-pitched scream that grew into a deafening roar. A series of massive explosions walked across the wadi where Anya had placed the enemy mortar, turning the night into day with brilliant, violent flashes. The ground shook, and the shockwave washed over the ridge like a physical blow. The ambush was broken. The surviving enemy fighters, their command structure shattered and their heavy weapons silenced, began to retreat, melting back into the darkness. Anya didn't relax. She systematically cleared the area around the 2-gun nests she had taken, ensuring there were no wounded enemies playing dead. Her movements were a brutal ballet of efficiency. She found one fighter still alive, trying to crawl for his rifle. She dispatched him with another double tap to the chest, her expression unchanged. There was no cruelty in it, no anger. It was simply the completion of a task. She looked back up the ridge. The firing had stopped. The only sound was the crackle of a burning bush and the groans of the wounded Marines. She keyed her radio. "Bravo, this is Sharma. Overwatch is secure. Sit rep." There was a moment of shocked silence before Evans's voice came back, shaky and filled with disbelief. "Jesus Christ, ma'am. The enemy is broken. They're running. We have 2 wounded, Hayes and Miller. And Riker's on the net. He's alive. He's down on the valley floor, south of the compound. Badly wounded." "Copy," Anya said. She scanned the valley floor. Finding a wounded man in the dark, in hostile territory, was a deadly risk. For the Marines, it would have been a prelude to a desperate, costly rescue attempt. For Anya, it was the next step. "Stay put. I'm going to get him." A moment of quiet descended upon the ridge, a stunned peace punctuated by the distant, fading crackle of the artillery fires. The sudden silence was more deafening than the firefight had been. The surviving members of Bravo Team, Evans, Diaz, and the other Marine, crouched behind their rock wall, their chests heaving, the adrenaline starting to curdle into shock and disbelief. They had been seconds from annihilation. Now they were alive. The reason for their survival was a ghost moving in the darkness below. On the command frequency, a new voice suddenly cut through the static, crisp and authoritative, originating from halfway across the world. It was a full-bird colonel from SOCOM headquarters. "Kestrel Actual, this is Watchdog. What is the status of my asset? I repeat, what is the status of Spectre?" The radio operator at the FOB, a young lance corporal, sounded flustered. "Watchdog, Kestrel. We have a broken arrow situation in the Zarin Valley. We are trying to... Wait, who is Spectre? We have no call sign Spectre on this net." Sergeant Evans, monitoring the frequency from the ridge, felt a cold dread mix with his confusion. He knew what a broken arrow call meant, a U.S. unit in danger of being overrun. He also knew that when a colonel from SOCOM came on the line asking for a specific asset during a crisis, something was very, very wrong with their understanding of the situation. The colonel's voice was laced with icy impatience. "Your liaison officer, Commander Sharma. Patch me through to her, now." A wave of shock rippled through the Marines listening in. Evans looked at Diaz, whose face was a pale mask of confusion in the green glow of his NVGs. "Commander Sharma." On her private channel, Anya was already moving toward the last known position of Gunny Riker. She heard the exchange on the command net but ignored it. Bureaucracy could wait. A dying man could not. She found him near the base of the valley wall, propped against a boulder. He was a wreck. His leg was mangled, twisted at an unnatural angle, and his chest was dark with blood. His rifle lay beside him, but his hands were empty. He was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. The arrogant, formidable gunnery sergeant was gone, replaced by a broken man waiting to die in the dark. He saw her approach, a silhouette against the starlight. He flinched, trying to reach for his weapon. "Easy, Gunny," Anya said, her voice soft. She knelt beside him, her rifle held at a low ready. Riker stared at her, his eyes glazed with pain and shock. "They're all gone," he rasped, blood flecking his lips. "My whole team walked right into it. They were waiting for us." "I know," Anya said. She was already working, cutting away his pant leg to expose the wound. It was a bad one, a compound fracture with significant arterial bleeding. She pulled out her second tourniquet. "This is going to hurt," he grunted as she tightened it, his body arching in agony. "Who the hell are you?" he breathed, the question that had been burning in the minds of all the Marines. Before Anya could answer, Evans's voice came over her headset. "Ma'am, Colonel on the line for you. He's asking for Spectre." Anya paused in her work, her hands covered in Riker's blood. She let out a quiet sigh. The veil was being lifted. She keyed her comms. "This is Sharma. Spectre, report," the colonel's voice commanded, bypassing all protocol. "Asset is secure," Anya replied, her tone shifting. The quiet liaison officer was gone. In her place was someone else, her voice clipped, formal, and cold as ice. "Mission package compromised. Intel was the plant. The target was us. I have multiple USMC casualties, at least 4 Kia, 3 WIA. Enemy forces neutralized or dispersed. Requesting immediate casevac for wounded." Riker, fading in and out of consciousness, heard the exchange. He heard the way she spoke. He heard the name the colonel called her. Spectre. It was a call sign whispered in the dark corners of the special operations community. A ghost. A legend. A Tier 1 operator sent in when things went catastrophically wrong, or to handle objectives that officially didn't exist. She wasn't a liaison. She was a scalpel sent to excise a cancer, and they had been the unwitting cover story for her operation. His platoon had been bait. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, a pain that eclipsed the agony in his leg. His arrogance, his threats, his contempt. It all seemed like the pathetic posturing of a child in the presence of a god of war. He had threatened her life. He looked at her hands, expertly and gently packing his wounds, saving that very life. The irony was a bitter pill. "Solid copy, Spectre," the colonel said. "Birds are in the air. Your secondary objective is scrubbed. Your new primary is getting our people out of there. Alive." "Acknowledged," Anya replied. "Spectre out." She finished stabilizing Riker's leg, injecting him with a syringe of morphine. She looked at his face. The hostility was gone, replaced by a raw, profound shame. He tried to speak, but only a choked sound came out. "Save it, Gunny," Anya said, her voice softening again. "We're not done yet. Can you walk?" Riker shook his head. "Right," she said. She grabbed his gear, slung his rifle over her own shoulder, and then hoisted him up in a fireman's carry. The man weighed well over 200 pounds, plus the weight of his gear. Anya grunted with the effort, her muscles straining, but she got him onto her shoulders. She was impossibly strong. She started the slow, agonizing climb back up the ridge to the overwatch position, one grueling step at a time, carrying the man who had dismissed her, threatened her, and underestimated her. And in doing so, she was carrying the weight of his entire platoon's failure, and lifting them all out of the valley of death. The thudding beat of helicopter rotors grew from a distant whisper to a roaring tempest that kicked up a storm of dust and debris on the ridge. 2 Black Hawks, bristling with machine guns, swooped in, their landing lights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. The evacuation had arrived. The surviving Marines worked with a grim, silent efficiency. They had fashioned a makeshift stretcher for Lieutenant Hayes. Sergeant Evans and Diaz carried him toward the first bird, their movements jerky with exhaustion and adrenaline. Anya, still carrying the dead weight of the unconscious gunnery Sergeant Riker, followed them. She moved with a steady, relentless pace, her face a mask of determination, refusing any offer of help. It was her burden to carry. As the flight medics took charge of Hayes and the other wounded Marine, Evans turned to help Anya with Riker. He reached for the gunny's arm, but Anya simply shook her head. She carried him all the way to the helicopter's ramp and, with the help of a crew chief, carefully lowered him onto the floor. She stepped back from the aircraft, her part in the evacuation of the wounded complete. The first helicopter, carrying the injured, lifted off, its rotor wash tearing at her uniform. The second bird settled onto the ground to retrieve her and the remaining members of Bravo team. As Evans and Diaz filed past her to board, they paused. Their faces, caked in dirt and sweat, were etched with a new understanding. The mockery and suspicion were gone, burned away by the fires of the ambush. In their place was something akin to reverence. Diaz, the young corporal who had smirked at her just hours before, looked at the ground, unable to meet her eyes. "Ma'am," he mumbled, the word now holding a weight it never had before. We wouldn't have," he trailed off, unable to articulate the depth of their debt. Anya simply nodded, acknowledging his words without needing him to finish the sentence. Sergeant Evans was more direct. He stopped in front of her, his expression serious. He didn't say anything. He simply raised his hand in a slow, formal salute. It wasn't the perfunctory gesture owed to an officer. It was a sign of profound, hard-earned respect from one warrior to another. It was an apology, a thank you, and an admission of his own blindness, all conveyed in a single silent act. Anya met his gaze and returned the salute with a crisp, economical motion. The last man to board was supposed to be Riker, but he was already on the other bird. His moment of recognition had come in the valley, in a haze of pain and dawning shame. This moment, here on the ridge, belonged to the men she had directly commanded, the men she had pulled from the fire. She climbed into the Black Hawk and took a seat by the door. As the helicopter ascended, banking sharply over the valley, she looked down. The target compound was a dark, silent shape below. The bodies of the fallen Marines of Alpha Team were still down there, a grim testament to the mission's cost. A recovery operation would come later in the light of day. For now, the night had taken them. She felt a familiar, cold pang of loss, but her face remained impassive. Emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford. During the flight back to FOB Kestrel, no one spoke. The roar of the engines filled the cabin, but the silence between the survivors was heavier. Evans and Diaz sat across from her, occasionally glancing her way with expressions of awe. They were looking at her, but they were seeing the phantom who had single-handedly dismantled an ambush. They were seeing Spectre. Anya ignored their stares. She leaned her head back against the vibrating fuselage, closed her eyes, and let the rhythmic thumping of the rotors lull her into a state of focused calm. She was already processing the engagement, analyzing her actions, identifying fractions of a second where she could have been more efficient. The mission wasn't over until the debrief was complete. Back at the FOB, the sun was just beginning to bleach the color from the eastern sky. The base was a hive of activity, medics rushing to meet the helicopters, a grim-faced commander waiting on the tarmac. Anya disembarked and was immediately met by a clean-shaven officer in a crisp uniform. "Commander Sharma," he said, his tone respectful. "Colonel Webb wants to debrief you personally over secure comms." Anya nodded. "First, I have to account for my gear." She walked away from the officer, away from the waiting command structure, and found a quiet corner near the hangar. She unslung her rifle, the weapon that had been her partner in the valley's violent dance. The other Marines watched her from a distance, giving her a wide berth not of dismissal, but of deference. They were giving her space. She sat on an empty ammo crate, the first rays of sunlight warming her face. She laid a canvas cloth on the ground and began to disassemble her rifle. It was a ritual, a sacred routine that centered her after the chaos of combat. Her hands, still stained with dirt and Riker's dried blood, moved with a surgeon's precision. Each part was wiped clean of the grit and dust of the Zarin Valley. The bolt carrier group, the firing pin, the charging handle. She worked in a pool of silence, the clicks and scrapes of metal on metal the only sounds. It was a form of meditation, a way of imposing order on a world defined by entropy and violence. She was cleaning away the residue of the night's work, preparing the tool for its next task. Gunny Riker, bandaged and strapped to a gurney, was being wheeled from the med tent to a waiting transport plane for evacuation to a hospital in Germany. He was heavily sedated, but his eyes were open. As his gurney passed the hangar, he saw her. He saw the lone figure, silhouetted against the rising sun, methodically cleaning her weapon. He saw the absolute, unshakable professionalism. He saw the quiet dedication that had saved his life and the lives of his remaining men. He saw the operator, the warrior, the Spectre who had walked out of the darkness. The threat he had made seemed like a lifetime ago, the words of a foolish, arrogant stranger. He raised a hand weakly, a gesture of acknowledgement, of concession. Anya didn't see him. Her focus was entirely on her task. She finished reassembling the rifle, the final click of the receiver seating into place echoing in the quiet morning air. She worked the action, listening for the smooth, solid sound of a perfectly maintained machine. Satisfied, she set the rifle aside. She leaned back against the hangar wall, her work done. The sun had now cleared the distant, jagged mountains, bathing the dusty FOB in a pale golden light. The night was over. The valley had been survived. She watched the sun climb higher into the vast, empty sky, her face unreadable, her mind already on the next horizon, the next mission, the next time she would be called upon to be the ghost in the darkness. The silence was her reward, the sunrise her only commendation, and for her it was enough.